Fantastic. We have technically a working skill tree because we have skill nodes that do stuff to our character when we click on them, but we can spam them and we can't actually see any of the information about them, and they're just kind of generally a little bit weird in the way that they work. So let's build a better UI that previews whatever skill that we're going to unlock and then has a unlock button inside of that UI instead of directly just clicking on the thing and hoping that it is what we want to get. So to get started with that, let's go back into our skill tree folder here and add in a new user interface. And this is going to be our user widget. WBP skill tree menu is what I'll call this. So this is going to be housing our skill tree, as well as a widget that will show us information about whatever skill that we're clicking on. So since we're going to be adding this directly to the screen, we add in a canvas panel first. And you might be thinking, I told you that you only really generally add canvas panels like one at a time. And what we're going to be doing next is going to shock you because we're going to be adding our skill tree into this canvas panel. So right now what we have is a canvas panel within a canvas panel, which is generally something that you try to not do too much. The reason that we do it here is because we need the canvas panel in one sense for proper UI scaling on different aspect ratios, different resolutions. But for the skill tree itself, we still need it to be a canvas panel because we want to be able to freely move around these things within here while still maintaining their relative position to the center properly. So we actually need both of these to be canvas panels. Now, you can put this in however you want. Then we put in the anchors for it to be whatever size it is. And one important thing to note is that if we make this thing very tiny, you can see still outside of the bounds of our canvas panel, we can see the contents of whatever is inside it. And the bigger our skill tree is going to go, the more that's going to not be a good thing. So if we just, again, set this to being very thin, we can scroll down here, and at some point you're going to be seeing in rendering, quite near the bottom, we have a clipping option. We can set this to clipping to bounds, and now it will only show the actual contents within the bounds of our widget. And the best way to maybe show that off is to actually put in a image for now in our canvas panel, and that image, and then we set that to be aligned to the center as well. And we make sure that that is alignment 0.5, 0.5, position 0, 0. So it's actually aligned specifically to the center. And then we can set its size to being something like 15,000 by 15,000. So it's actually super huge. We also want this to be the first thing in the stack so that it is at the bottom. And then we can set the color and opacity to something slightly more pleasant, like this gray and then kind of see-through. But this thing is now absolutely huge, right? So if we go back into our skill tree menu, you can see that it still does get cropped to the bounds of whatever it looks like in here. Small little thing, but quite important to take into account. Now, we're going to be needing to make a new little widget here as well. And that widget is going to be a user interface thing, user widget, WBP, and we'll call this skill info. The skill info is going to be a overlay, not a canvas panel this time around. And inside of that overlay, we're going to do something quite similar to what we just did with the image. And we're going to be putting in an image for the background. This image, however, is just going to be stretching horizontally and vertically to its max. And then we just set it to like a see-through pleasant gray. You can make this any color you want. You can give this a texture. You can give this a material. Again, whatever you want visually. Doesn't matter, it's just to make it a little less boring. And alongside that, we're going to also put in a vertical box in the overlay. And then everything about the info is actually going to be contained within this vertical box instead. So this vertical box is going to be containing a size box because we're going to be housing an image inside that. And that image is going to be the icon for the ability as well. So this size box, we can set to whatever scale we want. I'm going to set this to a width and a height of, again, just 100 seems pretty good to me. And this one I'm going to align to the left side and then make sure that the vertical alignment is still set to fill vertically. We can also then give it a little bit of padding so that it's not snuck up against the corner like there. So let's give it 50 units of padding, just so that it has a little bit of room on each side around it. Then I'm going to actually wrap this size box with a horizontal box. So we create a horizontal box above this size box. So what we have now is we have our vertical box. Inside that we have our horizontal box. And inside that we have our size box. Inside that we have our image. This horizontal box is also being used now to contain the name of this skill. So horizontal box contains both the size box with the image and then the text for the name. Let's also make sure that we give those variable names for now already. So we can call this icon and this one name. And we know that this is going to need to be a variable. So let's just immediately set that to being a variable. I like to vertically align this to the center so that it is, well, looking nice and centered. And then horizontal alignment, we can set that to left aligned. Doesn't really matter in this case. And then the justification can be left as well. The padding, I'm going to set left to 50 for this too. So that there's a little bit of distance between these. And that's pretty much all there is to the name. So we can now collapse this horizontal box again, because the only thing that we needed there is just to have the icon and the name next to each other. Everything else is going to be stacked vertically under each other from this point. So the next one is also going to be a text. This is going to be the text for the description. Make sure that it actually gets put into the vertical box, not into the horizontal box. I accidentally put the name outside now. Okay, yeah, there we go. It takes a bit. And then we set the padding to the left here to 50 as well, so that they're nicely aligned. And this is going to be the description, which obviously also needs to be variable. Now for this, I'm going to make a little bit more room in the UI real quick to show you what I'm going to do. This is now aligned 50 padding to the left, but it still has padding all the way to the right. So we want the right to also have 50 units of padding. And the reason for that is that if this is a very long text, we want it to wrap around before it reaches the very end of this widget here. And speaking of wrapping, we're going to look for wrap, and we can say auto wrap text. If we just enable that, it's going to automatically just make a new line of text whenever we reach the end of however big this widget ends up being. This is the nice thing about a lot of these Unreal Engine widget components, is they're fairly intelligent in the way that they work. If you have a super long widget on like a very wide monitor, it can contain a lot of text on one line. If you squish that widget down, because either it's a small part of a bigger screen or just because you're on a very narrow monitor, like a phone screen or whatever, it will still just intelligently wrap whenever it needs to the next line. Then also, I'm actually going to set this one, instead of auto for its size, to fill, which means that it's going to be filling the entire space that it has here. And the reason for that is because we're going to be adding one more text in here, inside of the vertical box, and that'll be the cost, which once again I just set to have 50 units of padding on each side. And you can see, because this text block now takes up everything that it can, it pushes this one all the way down to the bottom, and that is 1000% what I want. I want this one to be aligned all the way to the bottom, this one to have as much room as it can take, and then we have this one up here aligned to the top. Once again, the cost itself is going to be a variable text, obviously. And then as the very last thing that we're going to be adding is we'll add a button, because all this is to, on the one hand, display information about our skill, but also confirm that we want to actually buy this skill or get this skill, whatever you want to call it. So once again, I'm just going to give this 50 units of padding to each side, and maybe actually have the bottom of our cost text not have any padding, because what ends up happening if both of these have 50 units to each side, there's going to be 100 units in between these two, and that's just a little much for the way that I like these to look. So either this one needs to lose the padding to the top, this one to the bottom, potato, potato, ends up being the same thing. One more text to just put inside of the button. This one doesn't even need to be variable. All that this is going to say is this is just going to say unlock. And this is going to be our widget info and also unlocker widget. So time to put in some code. So let's go into our graph, and instead of directly programming inside of construct or pre-construct, because we're going to need to update this initially whenever we construct this thing, obviously, but also then later on when we click on any given other widget, What we're going to do is we're going to put this inside of its own custom event or a function, whatever you prefer. And we'll just call that update skill info. And this is going to be taking in the skill node that we have just clicked on. So it needs a input here, which we can do right there. And this will be just skill node. Let's call it that. And it's going to be of type WBP skill node object reference. Now, very first things first is that's immediately going to become a variable. So skill node to display, just so that we can easily keep track of it. And we then, whenever we update this, we want to check, hey, are we updating this to a actual new skill node value, or did we get given in a empty value, which means that we're going to be displaying nothing right now, which is going to be the case most likely on initial like startup of this widget. What we're going to do is we're going to check if that new value that we've just gotten in is valid or not. Because if it is not valid, effectively everything within this vertical box is going to need to be no longer visible. So we make the vertical box itself a variable, and then we just set its visibility. So set visibility. And we can either set this visibility to being hidden, which just means that it's invisible, or collapsed, which if you put this within other widgets itself, means that it's also going to be taking up no more like physical space in the layout. In this case, hidden will do fine because there's nothing else going to be below or above this vertical box in my case. If that is the case for you and you want that to like actually expand and contract based on this, you would use collapsed instead. However, if whatever we just gave in is valid, we want to also set the visibility, but now we're going to be setting it to visible. And of course, hook this up to the vertical box as well. Don't worry if this already is visible and we're setting it to visible again, nothing really happens. That's fine. And then from there, we effectively do the same thing that we did inside of our skill node itself, as you might remember. Here on pre-construct, what we did is we took the skill and we took the name and we used that to set the name, and we used the icon to set the icon, and so on and so forth. We're going to be doing the same thing here in the skill info. There's just going to be a couple of extra nodes to it. So we have our skill node to display, and that skill node to display has a get skill to unlock. It's the variable that we made on it. From there, we can get the skill name, we can get the skill icon, and we can get the description for the skill, which I mistyped, I see now. And from there, it's easily just, we get the icon, we get the description, and we also get the name, and we just set everything accordingly. So in the name, we set text very easily to our skill name. Once again, it is a better habit to use functions whenever they are available to set variables. Just, it doesn't matter in this case, but as a habit to get into, it's a good thing to do. Because sometimes a function might do more than just set the value, and usually you'd want to have it do whatever else it's also going to do. So we set brush from texture with the icon, and then the texture is going to be the skill icon. And then we set the text as well with the description. Now you might notice that we're not setting any cost text yet, and that is because we don't have a mechanism for costs yet. So we're going to be doing that in the next video, setting up the code for the costs, which will function very similarly to how we have the skills set up. We'll circle back to actually giving this cost thing its proper like text value once we actually have that stuff in place. So with all that, we have this update skill info. Now on construct, and maybe even pre-construct, depending on what you want in the designer, I'm just going to do this on normal construct. We just want to run this with an empty value. So on event construct, we update skill info and just give whatever we give in as empty. What that's going to do, as we said before, it's just going to make everything invisible until we actually give in a value. Now, how do we give in values to this? Because we don't really have any code set up for that yet, do we? No, we don't, but it's fairly easy to do that. So what we're going to do is we go back into our skill node. So that's this widget over here. And all that we really need to do there is we need to add in a event dispatcher. And we'll call that on node selected. And we give that an input. in the new parameters with it selected here. That should be a possibility. And we'll call that just node. That'll be of type WBP skill node. So all that this is going to do is whenever we click on this button, instead of directly just unlocking this skill, it will just call out this event dispatcher with a reference to self. That way, our other widgets can listen out for this thing and get given through the thing that was just clicked on. Obviously, that means that we are no longer unlocking the skill when we click on these buttons. So we need to just change that around to a custom event, and we'll just call that something like unlock skill. That way we can externally run this from a different widget, which is what we're going to be doing with the widget info viewer. But that still doesn't get us from an individual node all the way to our skill info, right? Because how do we bridge that gap? Well, first and foremost, if we go back to our skill tree menu, we now have our skill tree info that we can put into this widget as well. And we'll make the anchors, again, scale up properly and everything like that. And these two are now inside of the same widget. So we can start making information go from the skill tree to the skill info widget. So all we need to do is inside of the skill tree widget, we need to listen out for every single one of these buttons emitting their event dispatcher. And then when that happens, we need to just kind of forward that signal so that this thing can listen to just one signal instead of a billion different signals, which might end up being a bit of a headache. So what we do is inside of our skill tree, we also just make an event dispatcher, which we'll call on new node selected. And this pretty much does the exact same thing. It just forwards the signal from the individual nodes. So we'll call the parameter here new node, and that's going to be of type skill node as well. And all that we do here is we just, on event constructs, we want to make sure that our canvas panel is a variable. That way we can access it here in the code. And we just get all children. And then with all children, we for each loop over those. And we very simply just cast to our skill node to, number one, check whether or not an individual child is a skill node or not, because if it isn't, this cast is going to fail. But also because we need to get access to the event dispatcher on the skill node. Now, at the moment, it's only going to have one thing that's not a skill node, which is this background image as a child. But you might have other things inside of this that might also not be skill nodes. It doesn't really matter that much. It's only going to be running this once as well, so it shouldn't be too heavy, even though we are looping over every single child inside of the canvas panel. It's generally probably fine. Unless you literally have like tens of thousands of skill nodes within this thing, but at that point, you're going to run into other bottlenecks before this for each loop becomes an issue. Anyway, we loop over this skill node, and then we just assign to on node selected, which creates this binding node as well as a matching event. And now anytime any of the skill nodes within this tree get clicked on, this event here will run. And all that this event needs to do is it needs to just call out on new node selected. Just takes in the node that is given in and forwards it to whoever is listening. Now we have a singular event dispatcher to listen to for other widgets that might be trying to look for whatever node we most recently clicked on, instead of everything needing to subscribe to every single node, which can just kind of be a headache. So with all of that set up, it's a lot of setup, a lot of going back and forth between widgets here today, but now we have everything in place for clicking on a widget to update this widget info. So what this means is if we make sure that both of these are also variable, which they should be, and go into the event graph in the skill tree menu widget, if we have the skill tree selected, we now should have an event here on new node selected. That's the event dispatcher that we created. And whenever we select a new node, we can get our skill info and we can say, hey, update that skill info with whatever node was recently selected. So the chain of events that's going to happen here is we have a skill node that we click on that's going to emit a signal or a event dispatcher outward that's going to say, oh, this code actually here, that's going to say, hey, I'm just going to attach a reference to myself so that anybody listening out knows what button was just clicked on. Then the skill tree widget, which is going to be the thing housing all of our nodes, is going to be listening out to every single node inside of it. When it hears that signal that something has been clicked on, it has that reference of whatever node was clicked on given through. And it itself doesn't really do anything with that. All that it does is it serves as a centralized location to forward that information to things that actually care about it. So it hears, oh, your button number 33 or whatever has been clicked on. Then this thing just shouts out, hey, this was the button that was most recently clicked on. And then our skill tree menu is just a thing that connects these two things. So whenever our skill tree has information about something new being clicked on, it just tells that to the skill info widgets, which can then update all of its information accordingly. If we finally go back into my third-person blueprint here, and instead of adding the skill tree directly to the screen, as we've been doing before, I'm going to be adding our skill tree menu to the screen. And now we'll be able to see, if I click on one of these, it immediately updates and shows all of the stuff for it. If I now click on another one, it updates this. I apparently didn't update the description for this asset, but if the asset actually is well written, so in here I just have a issue where I didn't type the description properly, but now that that is fixed, we will see that if I go through, it actually shows everything whenever I click on one of these things, which only leaves us with hooking up the unlocking button. And that itself also is super easy because we have this skill info widget, right? And inside of that skill info widget, we have our node that we're displaying already. So all that we need to do is whenever we click on this button, we already have that button as a variable. When we click on that, we just take our skill node that we're displaying. We first and foremost check whether or not that is valid. If it is valid, we can get the skill reference to the asset that is on that node, which again, we should check whether or not that is valid. And if that is both valid, we can just unlock skill to player, which once again, this thing might have a reference to the player itself. Eventually, as we get along with like unlocking stuff and all that kind of goodness, it likely will. But for now, we just add a player pawn or get player character node and just provide that in like this. And just as easily as that now, this is the widget that's going to be actually running the function that will unlock our, in this case, HP upgrades. So here you can see, I can click on this, and then when I click on unlock, that is when it actually updates my HP. Now, I can still infinitely keep unlocking this, and that is because we still don't have anything to keep track of which nodes have or have not been unlocked. That is coming very soon. The very first thing that we're going to be doing before that, though, is adding something to add in a cost for unlocking something. So we have a experience system or whatever that we can take experience or maybe gold or maybe items from to make sure that we can only unlock these things if we actually have whatever resources we need to unlock them. That's going to be next video though. For now, if you want the project files, I always keep every single episode of a series up to date with the project files as they are at that point in time for YouTube members and Patreons. Helps a lot to support the channel and helps you hopefully with exploring the code as it is being written. And a very big thank you to all my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help support the channel or get any of the project files in any of my tutorials, there's a link down below to the Patreon page to support me, or alternatively as a YouTube member. My Cave Students tier supporters, Oiku, Earl, Monserville Erno, and my Cave Digger tier supporters, Mauricio Farias.